Happy Spooktember. What's up everybody, it's Alex, and welcome back to another creepy video. Now it is that time once again, another year of Spooktember. Another year, some more spooky topics to cover.
Last year, we talked about exorcisms and witchcraft.
Now, for our first Spooktember of the year, we're going to be talking about fairy tales. More specifically, the dark origins of fairy tales. Disney Studios took some of the older tales and retold their story in film form. These Disney films were overall nice, very happy. The characters go through conflicts and then they live happily ever after. That's how it goes, right? But in the original tales, it wasn't all that innocent. The tales have very dark origins. I'm going to summarize a few Disney movies and then go over the original stories. Now, most of these stories were written by the Brothers Grimm, but some of them were written by other famous writers during that time. So let's begin.
Cinderella was a movie that was released in the 1950s about a princess who lived with her evil stepmother and her evil stepsisters. Cinderella wanted to go to the ball, and with the help of her fairy godmother, she goes to that ball and dances with a prince. But then the clock strikes 12 and Cinderella runs off, but leaves a glass slipper behind. The prince takes the slipper, tracks down Cinderella, and they both live happily ever after. Now in the original, things play out similarly. Well, besides the father dying.
But there was one detail that was a bit grim.
When the prince tried to see who fit the glass slipper, he had her stepsisters try on the slipper. Now the slipper obviously did not fit them. Now in the Disney version, they were just upset. Nothing really happened. But in the Brothers Grimm version, when the slipper didn't fit on them, they mutilated their feet so they can wear the slipper. There's actually one detail that I forgot to mention, and it has to do with the two evil stepsisters. Let's just say their ending is not so happy. During Cinderella and the prince's wedding, birds actually pecked out their eyes. And yes, I'm recording this when I just woke up. Snow White was a movie released in 1937. It follows the story of Snow White, who lives with her wicked stepmother, who is jealous of Snow White's beauty. The evil queen consults the magic mirror on who is the fairest one of all. The mirror says, the queen is the fairest of them all. But Snow White fell in love with a prince, which makes her the fairest one of all, which makes the queen jealous. So jealous, in fact, she orders a huntsman to kill Snow White and bring back her heart in a box. The huntsman couldn't go through with the queen's request, so he found Snow White and told her about what the queen wanted to do. He told her to run as far away as possible. Snow White ends up in a cottage with 7 dwarves, and the woodland animals, of course, that she summons with her song. The queen finds out about this, so she transforms herself into an old hag to trick Snow White into eating a poisoned apple. Snow White is fooled by this and gets poisoned by the apple. A year later, the prince finds out about Snow White and goes to see her. He kisses her, which ends up awakening Snow White, and they both lived happily ever after. In the original story, in addition to the poison apple, many other attempts to kill Snow White were made, which included a poisonous comb, but every time the 7 dwarves saved her from dying. When Snow White was deceased, she was put in a glass coffin. When the prince found out about this, he visits Snow White and the dwarves. He then offers to take the coffin
and give them something in return.
Literally begs him to give him the coffin. He couldn't live without admiring her beauty. They finally took pity on the prince and gave him the coffin, but when his servants arrived to take the coffin away, they trip on a bush, which dislodged the poisonous apple from her body. Word got out about how the queen tried to kill Snow White, so at the wedding she was forced to dance wearing hot iron shoes until she died. The Little Mermaid was a movie that was released in 1989. The story follows a mermaid named Ariel, who saves a prince from drowning and falls in love with him. She dreams to live with the prince on the surface, even though her father, the king, would forbid it. She consults a sea witch named Ursula to help turn her human. Ursula ends up turning Ariel into a human in exchange for her voice. The long story short, Prince Eric and Ariel end up getting married and they live happily ever after. Quite a happy ending, right? Well, sadly, I can't say the same for the original. The Little Mermaid was actually a book written by Hans Christian Andersen. In this version, Ariel turns 15 and is allowed to swim to the surface. She oversees a birthday celebration on a ship. She sees a handsome prince that she falls in love with. But then, the ship sank. The mermaid saved the prince from drowning. Later on, she visits a sea witch in the most dangerous part of the ocean. In exchange for her voice, the sea witch would turn the mermaid into a human. The mermaid accepts this and is transformed with the knowledge that she will never turn into a mermaid ever again. Once the mermaid got her legs, when she walked, it felt like walking on sharp knives. Sadly, when she finds the prince, he had already married someone else. This obviously broke the mermaid's heart. In order to become human again, she would have to kill the prince. She couldn't bring herself to do that. So she ended up sad and eventually dissolved into sea foam. Tangled was a 2010 film about Rapunzel, who was the daughter of the king and the queen. Rapunzel had long magical hair that gave eternal youth. Because of that, as a baby, Rapunzel was taken by Mother Gothel. She did this to use Rapunzel's hair to make her young and beautiful forever. But when Rapunzel eventually turned 18, she was curious about life outside the tower. The prince helps Rapunzel escape and return to the king and the queen. In the original, by the Brothers Grimm, the prince falls from the tower and lands in a thorn bush face first, which blinds him. Rapunzel was then banished from the tower. The prince found Rapunzel by following her singing voice. When they reunite, Rapunzel cries, knowing that the prince was blind. Luckily, her magic tears gave the prince back his vision. In the end, the prince and Rapunzel go to his kingdom and live together forever.
Alright guys, that is all the fairy tales I'm going to be covering in this video. There are just way too many. So I just picked 4 random fairy tales that are pretty well known. I will be also linking down below the original stories if you want to read them. Also let me know in the comments below if I should talk about more dark origins of fairy tales. I've been Alex LeBaugh, and sweet dreams.